Hello everyone and welcome to part 3 of my Olympic Sisters vlog for Dystopian Wars. And like I said in the last one, I've decided to break it all up so that each ship would get its own video. And still talking about doing a nice little display base for all 3 of them at the end. Not sure yet. We'll see how the comments go. But we're moving on to Olympic. And Olympic is interesting in her historical context because she was the first of the Olympic class. She was also the last of the Olympic class. She lasted the longest. She had the longest career, both as an ocean liner and as a troop ship during the First World War. So that makes Olympic, as her nickname went, I believe it was Old Reliable. She stayed in service into the 1930s. Which isn't bad considering that her keel was laid down in, I think, was it 1910 or 1911, something like that. But she was the first Olympic class to be launched. Titanic followed a year later. And after Titanic sank, I believe Olympic came back to Belfast and started a little bit of a refit where I think they retrofitted higher watertight bulkheads. They added more lifeboats. They increased the sort of safety a little bit because of that whole panic after Titanic sank. Every ocean liner started to look at the safety of their ships, and it really became a snowball effect of things that changed in the maritime world, really. So a lot of things happened because of Titanic, and Olympic was definitely part of the process of fixing that, like figuring out what happened, how it happened, what damage occurred. And then working a way to resolve that, or at least publicly facing news and images, we're trying to depict these ships as safe. So Olympic lasted until the 1930s, which I think is a tremendous, it's a testament to the strength of the Olympic class ships anyway, regardless of what happened to her 2 sisters. I think if they'd been left alone, if they'd hit the iceberg head on, if they hadn't struck a mine, you might have seen the Olympic class as being just a sort of footnote in history rather than this big thing that has a lot of context surrounding it and a lot of consequences because of what happened to them both. So anyway, what we're going to be doing for Olympic is her colour scheme as a troop ship during the First World War. Specifically, she had 2 schemes. She had an earlier scheme, which looks a little less boring, has a lot more big swervy motions and stuff like that in it. But the one later, the 1917-1918 scheme, is a bit more interesting because it is quite complex and quite fun. Which means painting it at the scale of Dystopian Wars is going to be a heck of a challenge, but is also going to make the ship look really punchy on a tabletop. I think it's going to really stand out. That black, white and blue, that dazzle pattern and everything on it. It's going to be interesting because I have been practicing my freehand. I've been practicing straight lines and stuff like that. You'll have seen on the Titanic one, I more or less freehanded that yellow stripe, and that I was using that as practice for working on to Olympic. And then of course Britannic as well also has a lot of straight edge stuff on it too. So should probably get started then, really, shouldn't we? Working on to Olympic, and then should probably So I wanted to pause after getting the camouflage done, mainly to just talk about it a little bit, because obviously with the change of scale and the ship being a slightly different shape to the actual Olympic, it does change the pattern a little bit. Obviously I'm not as skilled with freehand as many others in the community are, which is fine. But I think what we have in the end, is, as far as the camouflage goes, is a scheme that is the soul of the Olympic scheme without being a complete 100% direct copy of it. It has all the elements that the original does, but is obviously lacking a little bit in some of the finesse, which is fine, absolutely fine. Also, the white dry brush over the top of it, again, that lets it fade in a touch to the hull color underneath, is also a big help. Fades it down a little bit, makes it look a little less stark. I've also gone at this point, without filming it, the portholes and the windows and stuff have been blacked in, because that's a pure black, not the black grey that we've used, which also now has a white dry brush over it. They stand out a little bit more as well, make that look a little bit darker, a little bit more interesting, so that it's a detail that stands out. Where we go from here is basically almost the direct copy of the Titanic model. So we need to do the decking, we need to do all the wood details, we need to do our silver and brass details, and figure out what we're doing on the dome at the back. We're not too sure on that yet. Probably might even just leave it in the grey to make it look like it's been painted out or blacked out. Anyway, we'll push on and see how we get on. And figure out what we're doing on like it's been painted out or blacked out. So I'm coming back in again to talk about where we're at with the Olympic, because she does look very confusing and there's a lot of things going on. So what I've done is, as you've seen, I took a little bit of speed paint, some of the blinding light speed paint, thinned it down a little bit and gave all the white areas a coat with that, just to fade a little bit more and just add a little bit of shade into areas that needed it around the railings and stuff like that, and on the funnels. Where I've got to after that is I've given the whole model a spray coat of satin varnish. That's the Army Painter's satin varnish. That is there to seal down all the work that we've done, because now we're going to move on to weathering. And I think weathering is the stage that is going to make Olympic stand out a lot more, make her look a bit more interesting. Now, what I'm planning to do with that is to take a lot of soft tone wash, the Army Painter Quick Shade, start panel lining here and there, start looking at any sort of recesses that I could put a little bit of dirt or a little bit of building rust or streaking into, probably down the sides here where the capstans would be feeding out mooring lines and stuff, and just to start and shade it a little bit. And what it'll do is probably make the ship look a little bit warmer, because we're going to be adding a lot of brown sort of tones to it. It looks very cold at the minute, which is fair. So this little bit of weathering should hopefully make her look a bit more standout, bring some of the shape back, because the camouflage, obviously the camouflage is meant to break up the shape and confuse people that look at it, which it does a very good job of, I will say. The more I've looked at it, the more it's like, yeah, that is rather confusing to look at. So what we're trying to do now is bring the shape of the model back in through weathering and through shading and stuff like that. And that's kind of what I'm aiming to do here. But yeah, at that point, I think we're looking pretty good, because once the decking was done, I felt a lot more confident. Once the deck colors and stuff were down and shaded, I'm just a lot happier with the contrast that I'm getting in the model. You know, from a tabletop perspective, that's going to look pretty interesting. So the weathering should hopefully bring a little bit more shape back into the model. And yeah, we'll see what happens. So now we have the Olympic finished. That is going to be the end of this part of our vlog. And then in the next one, we get to go on to Britannic, which I think is probably going to be my favorite out of the three. However, I will say I am rather proud of myself with the dazzle pattern. Now, obviously on this side, it's maybe a little bit too chunky. I could have afforded to go a little bit thinner on the lines. But I think in general, I've managed to capture the essence of the pattern rather than completely replicate it, because it's a different shape of ship. Things are slightly different on the model compared to what the real one looked like. But that said, I think what's worked the best is that little bit of soft tone, Army Painter soft tone, just to add in a little bit of streaking, a little bit of grime and rust build up. I think that's worked really well, along with a little bit of dry brushing to fade back some of the coloration on the dazzle pattern. So I think in general, I've got a solid looking Titanic, I've got a solid looking Olympic, and I think when we get to Britannic, it's going to encompass a little bit of both, because Britannic's mostly white with the green lines, the red crosses and whatnot. And I think in general, we're going to end up with three very handsome looking models, and I'm very proud to be able to do that. And also, it's just a project out of my own heart. I just really like the Olympic class ships. They were built essentially up the road from here. And it's just nice to do something that's a bit more grounded in some history and a little bit more reality. Even though it is Dystopian Wars and it is very much different, it's making this little project has made a little bit of a gateway for me. I'm going to try maybe throughout the year, maybe work on a little bit of Dystopian Wars for myself, just to get into it a little bit more. I paint a lot of this stuff and I never really get to game much with this stuff. You know, I want to do a bit more of that. I think that's going to be one of my one of my 2024 promises to myself. No, I'm not going to call it a resolution or whatever. But I think in general, this is enjoyable. This was the most challenging of the three, I believe. Now, unless Britannic throws me a curveball somewhere along the way, I think Olympic was the most challenging, but definitely the most striking of the three, I think. But that's it for this part. Thank you very much for watching as always. And until next time, take care, stay safe, and see you again very soon.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.